Welcome to Scoop and Scale, where we dish up the science and weigh facts about mostly equine nutrition. I'm Michelle Anderson. I spent 2 decades working in equine media, and I currently create content and help veterinarians and businesses connect with horse owners through my consulting business, Cadence Marketing and Media. I'm a trail rider, dressage rider, and an at-home horse keeper.
And I'm equine nutrition consultant, Dr. Claire Tunis of Clarity Equine Nutrition. I develop diet plans for horses ranging from metabolic seniors to Olympic athletes. I also consult for equine nutrition companies. I'm a scientist, dressage rider, and a pony club mom.
Claire and I collaborated for years when I was the editor of an equine publication, and she was one of our regular contributors. We'd finish work, but we always had more to talk about. New products, new research, and our own horses. This podcast is an extension of those conversations. It's for anyone who wants to make better choices when it comes to feeding and caring for their own horses.
And before we get started, a quick disclaimer. The information in this podcast is general and not meant to replace the individualized advice of your own qualified equine nutritionist or veterinarian. While I have a PhD in nutrition, I'm not a veterinarian and can't give medical advice.
With that, thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the following episode. This summer, Claire and company are headed from Arizona to Kentucky for the U.S. Pony Club National Championships, where her daughter and their pony are set to compete. Congratulations to them. Congratulations, Mom. You have a lot of work ahead of you.
I do. No, it's great. She's super excited. It's kind of like going to the Olympics as far as she's concerned.
Yeah, not the only Olympics this year.
I know. Yeah. So, no, we're excited to go. But it is a lot. You're right. I mean, we're gone for 10 days. I've never traveled that far with a horse before. I've helped lots of other people travel internationally through what I do, but never done it personally. And it's a lot. And it's a lot of bits and pieces. Like we feed Bermuda. Bermuda's not on the hay list at the horse park. So how do we get that there? Do we take it? Do we put him on something else? Like it's just a lot of nuts and bolts and bits and pieces and all that kind of stuff to figure out. So and there's a lot of stuff to pack. And we don't have a lot of space to put it in. You know, you get a trunk.
Well, so for 10 days, is that 20 baggies of grain?
Yes, and we don't use Ziplocs because we have very specific rules about that. We're not allowed to put our feed in Ziploc bags for Pony Club, which is actually a really good thing because it sweats and it will mold. And so there's good reason for that. So we can put it in paper bags, but we're not allowed to put it in plastic Ziploc bags, which of course is what we all tend to do when we make baggies is we put it in plastic bags.
There was a gal at my barn who was a pony clubber, or her mom was a pony clubber, and she said her mom always made her use paper bags. We had a whole discussion about that. I hadn't heard that before, so it's not just her, huh? I recently made a trip just from Central Oregon to Idaho for a horse show, and it's a lot, like thinking of all the things you need, and you have to think about the biosecurity and the stuff you don't want to share once you're there, and what your horse needs, and maybe a little extra if you get stuck and need to stay an extra night. You just kind of never know what's going on when you're traveling. And I know when people are traveling internationally with their horses like they will be this summer, there's a lot more that goes into the logistics than just, me trekking over state lines. So it made us wonder what's involved in getting the U.S. team horses to international competitions. So we reached out to Max Corcoran.
Yes, and to anybody that has followed FEI eventing, I don't know that Max really needs an introduction, but she was the stable manager and head groom for Equine eventing team for more than 10 years. And has traveled all around the world to competitions. She's been to 2 Olympic Games, 2 Pan Am Games, 2 World Championships with lots of different horses. And although she retired from that role in 2012 from full-time grooming and managing, she now freelances. I don't know that she's any less busy or traveling any less. And in recent years, she's also held several positions with USEA and is helping at events and things in different capacities, wearing different hats. She was also stable manager for the Canadian team at World Games in 2014 and the Pan Ams in 2015. So, Max, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's great to see you again, Claire, and to meet you, Michelle.
So, Max, for those of us who aren't involved in eventing specifically, can you explain what a groom's role is when traveling with eventers?
Oh, I think the groom's role is a bit the same when you're traveling for any sort of Olympic discipline or FEI discipline. We basically make sure that the horses have everything that they need to have an uneventful journey when we're traveling with them. I mean, I think our role in general, even at home, is to make sure we're sort of a nanny slash nutritionist slash physical therapist slash beautician slash all those types of things. And we make sure that when the riders get on the horses, that they've got nothing else to worry about but to ride those horses. So they are rested and fed and healthy and sound, and the tack fits correctly, and there's nothing left to do but for them to do their job. So that's our job, which is a lot. And if we do it correctly, it is unseen. That's sort of the goal.
So are you working or managing the relationship with the veterinarian and the farrier also with these horses and the body workers?
Everything, you sort of are their manager with the team of people between your rider and maybe their trainer and your vet and your farrier and your physical therapist. You guys all sort of make a team, and you can say, hey, this horse shoes are due on this day, and sort of work that all into it. The rider might come up and say, hey, he's a little bit heavy on the right rein today. And so you might call the vet and say, hey, they're saying this, and well, let's keep an eye on that. What did you see? Oh, he's got some tightness in a muscle here in his neck. So there's all those things that you can piece together just to try to make them the most. Horses are like humans. We're all dysfunctional in our way we move, and everybody's got a funny hitch in their giddy up. So we try to make them the most functional, dysfunctional athlete we can.
So you know them really well then. I mean, it sounds like you obviously know every inch of the horses in your care. And I think it's also worth adding, you're also a little bit sports psychologist for your rider, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yes. Cheerleader, sports psychologist. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a lot. Well, I'm super excited to have you join us today. And selfishly, I'm hoping to get some little tips and tricks as we prepare to take our pony across the country. Will you be in Paris this summer for the games?
I will be in Paris. Yes, I will be helping the U.S. team, sort of helping the people that are in charge of all the disciplines, Hallie Griffin and Stephen Morrissey. I'm sort of there to be their backup to make sure the moving in and moving out and the helping look after the grooms, and everything happens really fast. The timeline is really, really tight. You've got the eventing horses move in, and then the day of the eventing trot up, the dressage horses move in. And then the dressage trot up is the same day as the eventing cross country. And then the eventing horses finish on the Monday night, and those horses leave, and the jumping horses come straight in. So there's a lot going on. So there's just sort of an extra pair of hands. That's my role, is to sort of be the person that can help problem solve is my role there. So it's pretty exciting. This will be my 5th Olympic Games, whether I've done 3 as grooming, 1 as part of the climate team in Tokyo, helping with the cool down tents and the ice and all that sort of stuff. So this is another avenue. I'm just so lucky to be part of it. Pretty lucky.
Well, they're lucky to have you. You've got a huge amount of experience that you bring to them. So I noticed yesterday, I think it was yesterday, time's all over the place for me right now, but I feel like they announced the US dressage team yesterday. And I don't know if they've always done this, but what I've noticed this time, maybe they've done it before, which I really like, is that they've announced the rider, the horse, the owner, and the groom, which I don't know if they've done that in the past. Maybe they have. I noticed it, and it really struck me. I thought it was really nice to actually really recognize the grooms that are behind these horses, because I think, as we're going to hear as we keep talking, like, you should get a lot of credit for getting these horses to where they need to be, because it's a lot of work.
Great organization called the International Grooms Association, which was founded about 4 years ago now, if I'm not mistaken, or was started to be formed 4 years ago. And obviously when COVID hit, we sort of slowed down a bit. But Lucy Catan, who is head of the British Grooms Association, she has started that, and that is one of her initiatives, is to have the grooms be recognized when teams are being announced. You can see the British team always announces their grooms. It's something the USEF has picked up on, and it's great. I love seeing that. It just makes me happy, because these are friends of mine that I know, not because I'm not doing it, but when I did do it, it's blood, sweat, tears, and it's a big deal when your horse gets picked. You have such pride in it all, so it's nice to see your name alongside it. It's just nice.
Yeah, so I guess that brings me to, what's it like? I mean, you've had probably a number of horses picked to be on US teams. What's that like when you hear that your horse is going to be on a team?
It's pretty emotional, quite honestly, because, especially when I was working for Karen, a lot of those horses are horses that, she produced as younger horses up the level. And so it's the training level events and the pouring rain and the preliminary events and the scorching heat and the intermediate event and the snow and all those things, and all the going back and taking our time and having to bring the horses back maybe a level because they missed a gap in their education that you didn't realize. And then you try to get them and peak them, and the whole team of people that is part of that group that is in there with you to try to make sure that you get to the trials and the selection trials really well, and then you do well there, and then the horses look well after, and then you get the call, and it's pretty great. You can't really describe it. You think, oh man, it's just cool to be a teeny part of something as grand and as big as the Olympic Games. You feel very small, but also so proud. And then you're really excited when you get named, and then you go, okay.
A lot of work to do.
Yeah, exactly. And there's all the worry, and you don't sleep until the games are over because am I doing this right? Is he okay? Did he sneeze? Did he sneeze the same way he sneezed last time? The poor vets and physios, once you get named, you're like, can you come out and look at this? Yeah, it's a nail in his foot where it's supposed to be, holding his shoe on. You're like, okay, but I think it moved. I gotta go. I'm gonna go. Yeah, it's like, take a picture of it and send it to me. No, he's fine. So there's that part of it. I mean, the riders, people always say to the riders too that, oh, look what you've done. This is so great. And that's when the real work starts, right? Because now it's time. It's your turn, and you've been chosen, and you're there to represent your country and your team of people. And that's when the hard stuff starts.
So you mentioned, or we've already talked about all the things that a groom does. What are you doing in this time frame, and how much time do you have from the time the team's announced to when you're on the ground at the games? And then how much time do the horses have to acclimate once you're there? There's just a lot, because they just announced the dressage team yesterday, like Claire mentioned. I'm like looking at my watch going and I'm a dressage person, so I'm like, we got to have a plan. We got to go. so.
Interesting. Depends on the country. The U.S. team, they announced their eventing team beginning of June. And more than anything, because our horses have to travel overseas, and other countries are waiting until Great Britain just announced theirs today. And other countries haven't quite announced their teams yet. And I think that's just so we can make plans for those horses, which is nice. And I think a lot of the dressage horses, I believe, are already in Europe at the moment, doing Aachen and Rotterdam and all those things. It's a bit of a different beast when it comes to eventing. We've got usually about 2 big competitions a year that our horses can go do because of the toll that it takes on them. Whereas the dressage people, those horses will peak 6, 7, 8 times a year. The jumpers, they go to a 5-star probably, maybe once a month, maybe twice a month, 1 month, and then nothing for another month. So they average more sort of 12 to 15 peaks a year, where our horses peak twice a year. So for us to be able to do that, to name the team in advance, and then every horse is so different, those horses can do exactly, and those riders can do exactly what they need to do to get those horses to be their best on that day. So typically, the eventing horses will leave on the 17th to head to Europe, and they will do a week of training camp there and then ship to the venue. They get to the venue, and a lot of it has to do with what the venue is going to allow you to do once you get there, how early you can get there. So the eventing horses will come in on the Wednesday. They trot up on the Friday. They start competing Saturday. So it's going to be very, very quick. And so it all happens really fast. And the best you can be prepared before you go in there, the calmer everything can be once you're there, if that makes sense. So just trying to stay ahead of all the things that you could possibly want, need, and trying to keep all the emotions. Horses recognize body posture, and people are moving really quickly, and you just can keep everything organized and slow and keeping their world, happy. These guys have all traveled a lot, these horses at this level, and they're just going, oh, here we are, another place. And why is everybody freaking out? It's like another big event. Yeah, exactly.
So what kind of coordinating then would you be doing with the team organizers as far as getting the horses there and coordinating the shipping of the feed and equipment and everything that you need to take with you?
In the past, what we've done is, once we know we've got this short list of horses, what happens is usually the riders will reach out to their sponsors. Most of these riders are sponsored by a specific grain company. There's times when we've been able to, when the horses went to Rio and to London, we sent a shipping container over, and what we did is pre-ordered a lot of the grain that we needed there and shipped it directly to the venue. There's a lot of rules and regulations in different countries of what you can bring in and what you can't bring in. And then usually, typically with an Olympic Games or a World Championships or a Pan American Games, there is some leeway that the USDA or their agricultural whatever department will allow specific things to come in with these horses and stuff. So it's very different for each country. Last year, when the horses went to the Pan American horses went to Santiago, Chile, every single label of every grain had to be pre-sent down. Every supplement had to have a label and the ingredients in it. Everything from any electrolyte paste to Commerce to And anything that you were giving your horses, all of that had to be pre-recorded and everything had to be predetermined. Everything had to be in a sealed container. And so it was very tedious and meticulous. And the shipping agents, Duda Corporation usually does a lot of the shipping with the US team, and they were amazing and had everything so organized and super, and did all the paperwork and all that logistics for us. So that was super helpful. And again, they're the agents for us heading over to Paris. And Pedon's Bloodstock is the group on the other end. And they've been doing Olympic Games and World Championships for a very long time. So they actually typically set the travel, and they are the ones that will sort of piece it all together. Duda will sort of help with the flights and stuff. But Pedon's is sort of the transport and stabling guys for these. And they've been doing it for, I can't even remember how long. So they know how to do all the logistics, when the trucks are coming, where they're coming from, who's driving them, how long it takes to get from point A to point B, all that kind of stuff. And they know the horses really well too. They're like, oh, such and such a horse. Oh, that's a stallion and it doesn't ship well. So we have to put that in this trailer to get it here. And it's going to go in this stall because it needs to be on the end. Like, they know all the nuances of all that, and they remember those things. So they're just incredible.
For international travel, I just think of, like, for me going from Oregon to California, like, there's certain things, hauling horses and having just like apples. And I'm like, oh, I'm crossing and I can't take my apples. And I'm like, so I went to a show and I didn't even think about it being over the state line. I'm like, oh no, I'm taking my apples, my contraband. And I think, so the agricultural issue is a big part of the regulations. Are there any other reasons that there are certain things that you can't take?
Mostly it's agriculture. A lot of times also too, though, I mean, it's weight. You don't want to take too much over because you're putting that stuff on the airplane and it's expensive. So you try to figure out how much you're going to need per horse, knowing that it can change. If you're going to be over there for an extended period of time, sometimes the easiest thing to do is just to switch your horse over to a grain that is manufactured and sold over there. Europe has incredible grains, way better than what we have here in America, but it's easier for them because America is so big, and to have the consistency is really difficult for some of the better grains, where in Europe, they can manufacture it. England is much smaller and you can get stuff out and it's still fresh, and doing it that way. So yeah, it's a bit different, but yeah, a lot of times it's just easier to change the horse over than have to try to bring your grain with you. And God forbid you take the grain with you and for some reason it gets moldy or whatever, something happens. So it's a good way. And usually your grain company in America will help you figure out what is the most comparable to your horse's diet in America to change them over to whatever you're having in Europe.
That sounds like a job for Dr. Claire.
I've done it. I've done it a couple of times. For example, riders who've gone over for Burley, for example, and they've gone over and they're going to train with somebody for 3 months to do Burley and then come home. And they're doing it on their own dime. And, maybe these are riders who aren't sponsored. And that's tricky. It's like, okay, how do we, this horse just ran really well and it's on this feed and we can't get that feed. Like, we do a lot more fat and fiber in the US than the Europeans do. And so it's really hard when you have somebody that's feeding like a high fat fiber type feed here to go there. There are more of them now. But I mean, it used to be like, okay, you're going to take this one and this feed, and then you're going to buy some oil, and you're going to, mix it together, and that's going to create what you're feeding in the US. So it's been a bit interesting. And then I also had a rider who qualified for the WEG when it was in Normandy, the World Equestrian Games. That was an interesting experience because she fed alfalfa and was told that they wouldn't be able to get alfalfa in Normandy because they don't feed as much alfalfa. And so she was told, well, you won't be able to feed him alfalfa. I sort of said, this is silly because he just qualified for the biggest competition of his life on this diet. Like, we should try really hard to keep him on the same diet. And I was like, and I know they feed alfalfa. It's called lucerne, but you can find it.
Yes, they just got well, that's half the thing, right? It's just finding what the name changes. Yeah.
Right. And so put their foot down a little bit and just sort of said, no, you have to go find us some of this stuff. Ultimately, they did. But yeah, it's an interesting process, helping people transition from being here to overseas. So if you obviously you pack, the elite grooms that are out there are packing for all the big competitions and national competitions and just regular weekend. Like you said, they've taken the horses up through novice and training and prelim if they're an eventing groom, and they've done their fair share of all different levels before they get to these big national stage or international stage competitions. I mean, Is the packing different? You mentioned the weight, obviously, if you're flying somewhere, but just the things you take with you, are they different or not really?
A lot of it is horse and rider specific, what you're packing. I mean, obviously you're going to pack things you would normally need, but then it's this horse needs these boots and needs this bridle and needs this kind of ice boots and needs this and that. And the rider, I always make my riders pack for themselves. I never really get involved with that. I got enough to worry about, and that's their responsibility. So I make sure that I've got air canisters for their air vests and stuff like that sort of live in a trunk. But for the most part, you're just sort of bringing what you need and keeping it simple, because then you just don't need too much junk, because it just gets to be too much. A lot of it is just horse specific of what you need and what you want to have with you, whether it's, a magnetic blanket or any modality like that, or their rugs, or, obviously you're depending on where you're going. If you're going to, the mandatory outing in Stable View last weekend, you're not bringing any blankets with you. But if you're going over from Burley, you're going to bring some heavier weight blankets and stuff because it's cold over there, so a lot of it has to depend on where you're going and who you're taking with you and all that kind of stuff.
I've gotten the opportunity to sit in on different discussions with FEI vets about biosecurity, and I know there are certain diseases that are in Europe that we don't want in the US that horses have. How does biosecurity and protecting the U.S. population of horses from potential disease exposure, how does that work at the grooms level?
Well, one of the things that the FEI has us do now is we have the FEI horse app. So every day, for 3 days before we arrive on grounds, we have to put in our horse's temperature so they can track that. And then when we get to the show, when the horses get checked into the show, they get their temperatures taken. The vets sort of have a little barcode on their passports that gets sort of put in saying the horse has arrived to that. And that's more than anything, it's sort of a tracing thing. So if the horses then do the competition, and every day, twice a day, we have to put in the horse's temperature. And then actually, interestingly enough, because people don't necessarily practice good horsemanship of temping your horses every day when you're at a competition. And there's been times when competitions that I've organized where, I got to get this horse over there and it ends up being fine. It's just got maybe a bit of shipping fever and it's fine. But at the same time, because everybody does have to do these temps twice a day, that you can be a step ahead of it. And then also in that too, if you are at a competition and then everybody goes home and a horse does come up sick, you can then notify all those people. It's not unlike back in the protocol of COVID-19, you can notify all those people, and there's a bit of a contact thing where you can say, okay, well, these barns where these horses have come from and have gone to now need to be quarantined or quasi-quarantined, make sure that they're okay. And so there's that section of it. And then the grooms too. I mean, you just sort of are smart and safe and don't hand graze near too close to other horses that you don't know, and not petting other people's horses, not letting other people pet your horses. It sounds stupid, but a lot of times in America, because they're there doing their job, and a lot of the EHV1 has been spread by the breeders, because the breeders have been braiding a horse and they're like, oh, good boy, and they put their little jammies on and off they go to the next horse, and they go see the next horse. They feed them a treat, same hand, same nose, same all those things. So there's that part of it that gets a little bit tricky. So it's just sort of being aware of it. And again, when horses are in Europe and they come back to America, they have to do a 48-hour quarantine when they land to make sure that they are well. There's blood drawn and all that kind of stuff to make sure that when they leave the quarantine station, that they are as well as they can be. That if they are sick, then they get stuck in the quarantine for a little bit.
I was going to say, I think that's going to be a top tip that I take away from our little conversation, actually. It's a good reminder to temp. Temping twice a day is a really putting that on my list. I mean, I knew that, but it's just like a good reminder to do that and to do it before we start, so we have a really good sense of what our normal is. And again, to remind the kids about just that basic biosecurity and just that not petting somebody's horse from New York.
But the breeders is a really good point, because that does lots of times happen in the middle of the night.
Well, even during the day too, they're just there and they're being kind to their horses and they just get on to the next one, and then there's the outbreaks, and then oh man, how did this spread? Oh, that's the poor breeders. They're just trying to do their job and doing their things, but you can see how it can happen easily.
So FEI competition has really strict rules around prohibited substances. There are certain things that horses can get that compete at the USEF competitions here in the States that FEI horses can't have. How do you manage to make sure that none of the FEI horses that are traveling internationally get any of their stuff contaminated with a substance that they shouldn't have. Because I just sometimes that green pellet is the same color as that other green pellet in the bag or the bin back in the feed room. And it's a shared feed room, or I don't know, maybe you don't have shared feed rooms, but how do you keep that from happening? Because that would be devastating.
It can happen, and people have heard stories about Regimate getting in a gelding's bucket and they test positive and all those types of things. So it's not just traveling internationally. It can happen at the show down the road that has an FEI division. So, and then there's places where horses will share stalls and stuff like that. Typically about 10 days to a week out before leaving for a big FEI competition. And sometimes even for the whole winter circuit, there are stalls that are just FEI stalls for those FEI horses. And you don't let any other horse, sometimes a lot of eventing horses sleep out at night. And so maybe that horse has already gone out for the night, but the 3-year-old's coming in to get their feet trimmed. And you're going to pop him in that stall just for a minute while he's getting his feet trimmed. But then that horse is, it's a baby. So you're going to give it some ACE pellets because you want it to be a little bit quieter for the farrier or the dentist or whatever it is. Well, now you've contaminated that stall, because if that horse pees and then the horse eats hay that the pee has been on, and so it can happen. It's that easy. So you sort of you make sure that those stalls that are those FEI horses, those are their stalls and their stalls only. And then whoever is in charge of making the feeds, that is like another sacred thing, is that those buckets are only those horses' buckets, and that you are very, very careful about everything that goes into those buckets. Those feed tubs are only used for those horses. Everything is, and just label it, just, FEI, FEI, FEI. And then all the supplements, make sure that every single supplement that you're feeding your horses is FEI legal. Ask your vet, you look at the ingredients on it, and there's some bizarre supplements you would think that would be FEI legal, but they're not. And then there's some supplements and some medication that your horses sometimes are on that there's a withdrawal time, so the horses can have it up till a certain time. And the horse that might have a sore back might be on Robaxin, which is a bit of a muscle relaxer to help with that. There's a cutoff period the horses can have it up to, and I can't remember what it is now because it keeps changing, maybe 7 days before then they have to come off of it. So there's that whole thing about it. So knowing the withdrawal times, knowing what you can and cannot give them, and again, keeping those stalls clean. The FEI actually has a great link. It's called Clean Sport, and they've got kind of a neat little test and a quiz that you can take to sort of test yourself on your knowledge of the Clean Sport. Because in the USCF rules, we can give 2 grams of bute to compete. The horses can compete on X, Y, and Z, but even for national, there is definitely a threshold too, so we've got to be very careful for that as well. If your horse needs to be body clipped and you're going to give it some Democedan because it's not very good about being body clipped, there is a withdrawal time on that too. So make sure that you're super aware of all the things, because you can also be in trouble for the USCF, not just FEI. It is different.
It really speaks to what we were talking about earlier, that once you're grooming at this elite level, there's so many more things to keep track of. And that if you're managing a barn at this level, it's a lot, right? And knowing the rules is really important. And I made that mistake years ago when I was in college. I groomed for an FEI dressage rider. I love turnout. I'm kind of a turnout queen. And this horse, I turned it out. It was immaculate. And it went to its vet jog, looking superb, and goes up to the vet panel, hands it its passport. And Dr. Tomlinson was the head of the vet panel, opens the passport and looks at the diagram with all the red ink on that shows all the white legs and everything, looks at great. And he's like, this horse has a white hind foot, except it's black.
Oh, yes, yep.
And I hadn't realized, and I had put my lovely blackening hoof oil on all 4 feet, and it looked absolutely stunning. Yeah, almost got my rider's horse spun from the initial jog because he didn't match his passport because that foot wasn't black. And Dr. Tomlinson's lovely. And thankfully, he realized it was not anybody trying to actually pretend this horse was a different horse. And so it was fine. I definitely got a talking to when we all got back to the barn. And there was a very nervous moment where I was like, this jog is...
I know. I hate when that happens too, because you're like, look how great my horse looks. It's like, yeah, but you F that up. You're like, oh, yeah.
I know. The only saving grace, and again, another thing, it wasn't my responsibility, but then later in the competition, my rider got himself eliminated for riding up center line in his Pre-St. George test with a whip, which you can't do at FEI. But at the time, you could do at USDF, but you couldn't do at FEI. But again, I was not a professional groom, right? I was in college full time and helping this person out. And had I known the rules better, I would have probably not let him ride. I assumed he would ride into the ring and drop it before he went up center line. And he didn't. And had I been more on the ball, maybe I would have said, hey, I need your whip as he rode through. But ultimately, that's his responsibility. But still, yeah, all these places where your grooms can really help make a difference. So yeah, knowing the rules is really helpful.
And the details matter.
The details do matter. And I'm a details person, so it killed me. I was just like, I felt awful. Mentioning that, I mean, at this jog, this horse has a passport. I mean, these horses all have passports now that they travel with. I mean, is there a ton of paperwork that goes with traveling with horses? I mean, are you in charge of all that side of things too?
Can I just jump in and say that we've had a couple from the barn that I'm at compete in CDI that we finally have in Oregon for dressage, and watching the poor vet scratch his head at having to fill out this passport with drawing the horses. He ended up bringing his daughter, and his daughter stood next to him to draw all the markings and the hairs and the whorls, and he was very nervous about it.
Well, they're big. I mean, I bought a horse in January that came with I'd never seen one before, right? He came with an FEI passport, and I was like, this book is massive. And like, again, there's all these rules about all the vaccinations and getting them all done at the right time and getting everyone stamping everything. I mean, it's a lot. Is there even more paperwork than that when you're...
Yeah, well, America is sort of the only country that doesn't have national passports. In England, a lot of times if you get a horse that comes over from Europe, they have a passport, and that passport is sort of their health paper almost, to say. They're not supposed to leave the property without their passports. It's sort of their driver's license, if you will, for the way are. And yeah, England, Ireland, all the mainland Europe, they all have their passports. And then that passport can get turned into an FEI passport. So that gets put in there. And even we have a national passport that you can use, I think, up to the 3 long level in eventing, if I'm not mistaken, the blue passport versus the purple passport. So then the purple passport, it is expensive and does all that, but you've got to make sure that's something that it's on my checklist of things to do when my vet comes for sort of the, one of the last checkups for my horses before they leave for their FEIs, to have a look at the passport, make sure that the shots can't be too close to when the competition is. They have to have their series, their initial series, and then they have to have their shots every 6 months. And, they've got to go through all that, and just to make sure. And that's usually just a flu vaccine. And then if they're getting any other vaccine, they get put in there. And then nowadays with the 100 jumper shows, and depending if you're going to like Kentucky Horse Park, you have to have a health certificate to drive into the state of Florida. There's the ag station. You have to stop at the ag station with your horses, with your coggins, and a health certificate, and all that kind of stuff. And then if you're traveling overseas, then there's more blood work and paperwork that has to get drawn and sent out to the USDA for it to come back, and their health papers and your carnet, which is the carnet is the piece of paper that says I'm taking this horse and equipment over there, and I'm also bringing all that stuff back. I'm actually not selling it over there, so they can't tax you. So there's all of those things that, there's health papers, and the health papers have to be originals with the actual stamp on it from the state vet, or the ministry vet as they call it in England. And then there's the papers, the 60-day paperwork. If you're in America and you go to Europe, every place you stop, you have to get the ministry vet to stamp where you've been, so that when you go back into America, they know where you've been. So if there are any disease, it goes on and on and on. But again, we have fantastic traveling people that between Pedens and Duda and Gellisons and Clatta and all those guys over there, they all help make sure we get all that paperwork done to keep everybody happy and healthy and safe and all that stuff, and not bring any cooties back to America.
Yeah, that's a good thing that you have all that help, because I'm imagining that most people who go into becoming elite grooms don't get into it because they like paperwork.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
No, not at all.
Yeah, for sure. And I used to work in epidemiology and actually work in disease modeling. And so, the horse side of things always is fascinating. We used to work and create computer simulations of disease spread. So all that. I used paper tracing, and I used to be involved in exercises where we pretended we had an outbreak and we did paper tracing and, where people have been and stuff. So it really actually is important, and it really does get used when there is an outbreak. So when you're managing horses on the road and flying them, I mean, do they generally fly well? I mean, do they travel differently flying than they travel in a trailer? Do you notice any big particular difference between the two?
They usually travel on a plane almost better than they do on a truck and trailer. If you think about it, when we're driving in a car, and you try to take a little nap, you can't really do that because you're sort of getting bumped around and done that. But when you're in a plane, it's very smooth. There's just more of a process of, it takes a while. The horses have to get to the airport. They've got to be there usually 6 to 8 hours before the flight. So the blood can get drawn. The vets there can see the horses to make sure that they're healthy enough to get on the plane. Then they have to get loaded onto the pallet, and then the pallet goes and gets weighed, and then it sort of hangs out for a little bit, and then it goes plane side, gets to the scissor lift, goes up, gets in, and they try to make it so the horses are about the last thing in so they can be the first things out. But the process itself can be a while, so they're sort of standing there. But once takeoff has happened and you sort of go back and have a quick check on them, they usually have a hay net. They usually got a water bucket. Well, you usually hang a water bucket after takeoff and just try to leave them alone and leave them be. And most of them, for the most part, travel very well. So you just sort of go back, have a quick peek at them, check on them, make sure that they're doing okay, and then go back and, check on them periodically. Most of them just do very well. Every now and then you'll get one that won't, and sometimes they get a bit worried, but takeoff and landing are sort of the hardest things for them. Usually you will know because they're horses that typically won't travel well in a trailer either. You know what I mean? So there's that part of it. And funny, the boxes that they put them in, when they're in a double stall, what they call like a stall and a half, you can fit 3 across. Sometimes that space is almost too much for some horses, so it gets really hard for them.
Yeah, some horses like the confinement and others like more space.
What about jet lag with these horses and circadian rhythms? Are you doing anything to manage their light exposure, like a hood with the lights that we use to manage mare reproductive cycles, or anything to help them out? I know when I travel internationally, jet lag just knocks me out. And then I can't imagine having to go run a marathon after that. So not that I can imagine ever running a marathon anyway, but...
Marathon sounds like a terrible thing. It's usually sort of 8 to 10 days the horses will get their jet lag. It takes a while for them to get it. I think they tried, a lot of people were doing the Equiloom, I think they're called, the light things. I don't think they noticed that much of a difference for these horses. Again, by this time, these horses have traveled a lot. When they went to Tokyo, it was a longer flight, so they had a longer time being there to have their downtime. So they had time to rest. When you're traveling further, you usually try to get to where you're going earlier so they have time to recover from that. They typically do quite well. The biggest thing when they're on a trip like that is hydration. It's to make sure they may or may not have been drinking. They don't maybe not drink very well. Typically, before they go on a big trip like that, the horses will get between 20 and 40 liters of fluids IV. And then to check their hydration level when they get there too, to make sure that they're well, and they may just need a bit more fluids once they get there to rehydrate them. But usually if you start off well, they feel well, and they're going to be more likely to want to eat and do all those things if they're feeling well. That's something that is a good practice, is to help keep them hydrated.
Yeah, I think that's something we run into even here. Like in California, I had a number of eventing clients who were traveling. They had to travel long distances, 14 hours just to get to a local competition. And those horses would sometimes get a little dehydrated, which then really just kind of stacked up on them as the weekend went on. Do you have, I think that's something that people who just travel even for local competitions struggle with, horses not drinking when they're traveling or not eating. I think everybody's had that horse that's just like, where am I? It's like, it won't eat. I've got one right now. We just actually moved barns this past weekend, and he just spent the whole time going out of his running stall back into this. And I'm like, can you just eat your hay? And he's like, no, there's cows. I need to look at the cows.
Yeah.
But you know what? Do you have tips and tricks that you'll use to kind of help keep those horses drinking and eating when they're at competitions?
Well, a lot of times, you can do things like watering their grain, putting water in their grain, and then even their hay. If you just wet their hay, or even steaming their hay, that's also a good way to get wet in there. Even if you have beet pulp or something to that effect, that's just sort of wet forage getting stuck into their bodies, which is great in the wintertime too, even though when it's cold, they don't want to drink a lot either. And that's when you can see a lot of impactions happening, when there's just a lot of stuff that's super dry. The other things that you can do, they make a lot of those sort of what I would call like a tea in the water buckets. You can stick, it's sort of like, even if it's just a handful of sweet feed or something with a bit of molasses or something, some salts and stuff. And sometimes you put that in there. I know horses that I've looked after from time to time, I like to keep a jug of molasses, and one bucket will have a bit of molasses in it and the other bucket won't. And a lot of times when you put that molasses in and you swirl it around, they go straight to it and drink almost an entire bucket of it. And that just helps. But if they don't prefer it, then you've got 2 buckets there, so they can have the fresh water if they want, or they can have the molasses. And that's just a cheap, easy way to help with that. And even things like apples have a lot of water in it. Carrots have water in it. Those are also things, bran mashes, you can do it like that to entice them. And then just trying to minimize the heat that you have, whether you try to travel at night or try to keep them as cool as possible. There's all those things you can do to sort of help them, especially this time of year when it gets hot. If you can offer them water as much as possible. Some trailers, you have the ability to be able to tie a water bucket up next to them, and so they can sort of dunk their hay or do any of that type of stuff too, which can be super helpful.
So with all of these trips that you've done, is there anything that you have taken with you every trip that you've never used and you wonder, why do I take this? But you know that the second you don't take it, you're going to need it?
I don't think so, actually. I feel like I believe that it's one of those things, like when I pack my own suitcase, that I want to make sure that I don't pack things that I won't use. And I always get, I'm like, oh, I wore everything I packed. I look at me go, right?
I always pack too many shoes.
I do the same thing, but I, just try to make sure that whether it's been like a blanket or a rug or something that I thought, just don't even know what the weather's like, but I will never not pack my things that I always want, because I know that that's going to be the one time. It's even like some of those bizarre things, whether it's, like a hole punch or I don't even know. There's a lot of those types of things, that funny little widgets of things that you just know that you feel better having, whether I needed it or not. I needed it in my mind. So.
An extra halter is mine.
Exactly. Yeah. I've always packed an extra halter. Two things that I always was really bad about packing was a grain scoop. And for some reason, I always had this massive brain fart on packing girths.
Oh, no. They're very important.
But only if I was going to like a lesson for the day. It was like a day trip. If I was going to the show for the day, or if I was going to a lesson across town or something like that, for some reason, I would never remember girths, to the point where the working students and my stay-at-home person was like, did you pack your girths? I'm like, nope. Because then I'd have to call one of them and be like, can you bring some girths down to me? Like, are you again? I'm like, yeah, pretty much.
It's funny because growing up, I forgot my girth twice, I think, at a competition. And thankfully, we used to have, at least tack stores, even tiny competitions. And so that's how I got my new girths, was I'd always have to go buy them. And then one time I left my body protector at home, and my mom looked at me and she's like, I am not buying your body protector. You need to get your butt out in the trailer park and walk around and find somebody who has your size that is not in your class, because I am not buying you another one of those.
That was sort of the era when I had Theodore O'Connor, and I also had a horse named Hugh Nose. So I needed a teeny tiny girth and a very large girth. So that was always, even if you did have a tag store there, I was like, ugh, you got an 18? Yeah, an 18 dressage girth. They're like, oh, what?
They're like gold. I mean, I'm in the pony realm, and trying to find 18-inch girths is like, nobody makes those. Not over here anyway.
Yeah, I'm on the oversized end of this and try to find the right oversized stuff. Oversized by like draft horse oversized.
Yeah.
So.
Right. Yeah. So we mentioned at the beginning that, you've been a groom, but you've also been a stable manager. And that caught my eye because, as I mentioned, in Pony Club, we have stable managers. So we send our kids compete with 3 or 4 riders, hopefully 4, so you get that drop score. And then the team has a stable manager. They don't actually have a groom in their team, but they have a stable manager. And we're always telling them, like, the stable manager is not your groom. That is not their job. Like, they oversee kind of everything. And I know, like, at the Olympics, they have stable managers. I mean, I think, am I correct that Dougie Hannum was a stable manager for a long time?
For a long time, yes.
Years, right? I mean, years and years. And he's amazing. What was his role? What was your role as a stable manager? Because it's different from a groom, but they're at all the games as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're basically making sure that all the horses have everything that they need. You sort of get to know, not them so intimately, but like, this one is on straw, this one has this hay, this one needs that, this one needs that. So then the grooms can just go to you and say, hey, I need X, Y, and Z, and that you make sure that that gets there. So then the grooms have everything they need. I mean, basically, the biggest thing is that the grooms have everything they need. So then they can make sure that the horses are good. So then the riders can just do their job. The riders aren't worried about helping the grooms get whatever they need. And that goes even straight down to making sure that the grooms have where they're sleeping at night and all that. Because I can tell you, we have slept in some interesting places in our life.
It's not all 5-star hotels and glamour.
No. 5-star hotels. In Rio in 2007, we slept in shipping containers.
That sounds really toasty.
Well, it was winter there, and we had to bathe in the wash rack because that was the only place where there was water that wasn't cold. So, but we did great. It was a fantastic trip. We did have a great time. It was awesome. But yeah, we just sort of do that. But basically, the stable manager makes sure that everybody has what they need and to make sure that everything's tidy, everything's organized, everything's up to standard. You want to walk in and you want to be taken seriously. You got to look serious and you set a standard, right? You're going to be professional. You're going to be clean. You're going to do all these things. And that leads to the competition side of it, that you're going to go in and you're going to be the best and you're going to do your best. And making sure that the horses, the riders, the grooms have everything they need to be the best on that day, whatever it might be, whether it's kicking everybody out of the barn so it's quiet for those horses and riders and grooms, or helping somebody with a forelock braid, or making sure that we need more shavings, or the horse needs a different type of hay, or whatever it is. So then or this boot that I thought worked on this horse has a cut on its legs, so we got to manufacture something for this cross country boot so it can be good. There's all those things, and you just sort of make sure that everybody's as good as they can be so everybody can do their own job.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing what goes into this. I think when we sit and watch it on television, we just enjoy the show, right? And there's so much going on.
Exactly. Yeah. Always a lot that goes into it. Oh, there's a lot. Yeah. But it's cool. It's part of what makes it epic.
Yeah, epic is right. In all years, do you have some favorite things? Like Michelle and I did a favorite things episode back at the beginning of the year.
I have a new favorite thing, but go on, Max, your favorites.
It's about Max's favorite things.
Well, I can tell you even though I do freelance, I have my own little backpack that I take with me, and I've got my favorite quarter marker brush because that's a hard thing to find and it's perfect and I love it. I love the tiger tooth sponges. Love those things. They're great for everything. I love witch hazel. I love, love, love witch hazel. I think it's fantastic.
What do you use it for people who are listening? Yeah.
Witch hazel is great for hives. Witch hazel is great for skin fungus. Witch hazel is great to get the dust off of a horse. You can spray it on and dust it. I use it when I groom. I curry the horse, put some witch hazel on, and then brush. And it just sort of, I don't know, it brings out a little bit of a shine. It sounds really strange to say that, but it does. And it just sort of helps pull the dust out. Don't know why. I don't know the molecular construction of it, but I just love it. And then in the summers when it's really hot like it is right now, you can put some on a towel and wash your own face down because it's an astringent. Witch hazel is fantastic. There's things that you don't want to, like apple cider vinegar in the spring with hives. It's magical stuff. I have a rope halter that I take with me everywhere too because I hate chains, and the rope horses seem to understand and know rope halters, and it keeps your life a lot easier. Those are sort of my go-to things that I always make sure that I have with me. And I always have like treats or something, peppermints, polo mints or something in my pocket, so they have something. I know some people don't love feeding the horses sugar, but even those Mrs. Pastures or Buckeye makes a really good sugar-free treats and stuff. So I'd love to be able to give them a treat. I love when they come out of the ring and they've been good and they look for you to give them a little something. I love that part of it. I love towels. I love having clean towels. Love them, the hand-sized ones, but not the face cloths. And not the biggie ones are great for after a bath, but I love that. And really good tack cleaning stuff. I don't know. I love all those things. I get Dawn dish soap or Ivory dish soap is actually what I like, having that stuff because it helps clean tack and everything else. So yeah, those are my things, I guess.
Well, is everyone in suspense over it? Mine is actually very silly.
What is it?
I packed the Honest Company flushable wipes in my tack trunk this last show.
Oh, yeah.
And they came in handy because it was really hot, cleaning up like my makeup on my face. They were used for cleaning bits. We had 2 horses with us that had white blazes, and you grab the towel and then you make it worse because the towel is not as clean as it should be. We used the flushable wipes to wipe horses' faces, to do touch-ups on boots. Like it was just like, because we didn't have immediate water access, in our stabling. And so it's just really nice, like just even to wipe off the back of your neck.
Yeah, baby wipes. I forgot about that. That's a good one. I do travel with like having those. One of those things you're like, ooh, yeah, I need that.
Well, I'm glad you forgot it because then it would have taken the wind out of...
No, it's a good one.
No, that is a good one. Yeah, I'd never used them before I had my daughter. And then she was well past needing baby wipes, and I just kept them around the barn and whatever. I thought, how did I ever survive without baby wipes?
Yeah, green slobber takes care of it. Well, that is all the time we have for this episode. Thank you, Max, for joining us and being part of our conversation. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to just, for anybody that's going to the Pony Club, I know you guys are going out there. My friend Emma Ford and Kat Hill will be out there. They're part of my Grooms Association for the USEA, and they are going to be out there with their world-class grooming books and stuff. So if anybody sees them out there, please go and have a listen to them because they're awesome. Emma and I have traveled, and Kat too, but Emma and I for sure have traveled the world together, and she can answer all the questions very, very well too.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll definitely go check them out.
For our listeners, we hope you've learned some tips and tricks for traveling with your horses, whether it's just to a local show or if you're headed across the world. And we hope that when you're watching the Olympics, you'll be thinking about the people who are working behind the scenes to get those horses and athletes there.
If you're listening to this conversation and it sparked any questions, please send them to us at info@scoopandscale.com. That's scoop and scale spelled out.
You can also find Claire at clarityequine.com. For the Scoop and Scale podcast, I'm Michelle Anderson.
And I'm Dr. Claire Tunis.
Thanks for riding along with us.